A battle broke out between two dormitories, the White Cats' dorm and the Black Dogs' dorm. Romeo, as the leader of the Black Dogs, and Juliet, as the leader of the White Cats, both signaled their subordinates to begin the attack. Once the fight started, their followers immediately clashed, striking each other without mercy, while Romeo and Juliet kept their eyes locked on one another. Hazuki tried to help Romeo, but he stopped her because he wanted to defeat Juliet on his own. The duel between the leaders then began. Romeo and Juliet charged forward, attacking each other. Dahlia Academy was a prestigious school where the eastern nation of Tuwa and the western kingdom coexisted, yet the eastern students of the Black Dogs dorm and the western students of the White Cats dorm were caught in a storm of conflict. When the two leaders were about to fight, Scott asked Juliet to let him take her place, saying that he was willing to protect her with his life. Seeing what he considered an irritating scene, Romeo struck Scott and lifted him up, belittling him and telling him to lock Juliet in her dorm instead. Juliet quickly stepped in to help Scott and threw Romeo aside. She told Romeo that she did not need protection from anyone and urged him to attack her with all his strength. Romeo admitted that he had no intention of attacking a woman as it could hurt his pride. Juliet became annoyed because Romeo kept underestimating her. Suddenly, Anne from the White Cats prefect group arrived with her team, coming to put an end to the conflict. Anne reminded everyone that the chaos was inappropriate. Romeo immediately rejected her words, refusing to obey a White Cats prefect. Anne then said she would report Romeo to the Black Dogs prefect. Hearing this, Romeo fell silent, unable to respond. After that, the White Cats members dispersed. Scott shouted that he swore to defeat Romeo, but Hazuki told him he was nowhere near Romeo's level. Later in the dorm, the Black Dogs students were upset about the prefect's intervention earlier. Prefects held the highest authority over school discipline. The Black Dogs students were confident they could beat the White Cats and placed their hopes on Romeo. At that time, Romeo looked gloomy. Hazuki offered to cheer him up, but her behavior only annoyed the other students. She quickly clarified that she had no inappropriate intentions toward Romeo, but without realizing it, Romeo had already walked away. Romeo was frustrated and unsure what to do. Since grade school, he and Juliet had always been at odds, and their rivalry continued through middle school and into high school. He was frustrated because nothing had changed. The truth was, Romeo had always loved Juliet. He never wanted to fight her and only wanted to make sure she was never hurt by anyone else. He was especially irritated with Scott for so casually saying he would protect Juliet, because those were words Romeo himself had always wanted to say to her. He was sick of the act and unsure how to get Juliet's attention. He wondered if he should just confess his feelings outright. If it worked, it would be amazing, but if it failed, he would never be able to face her again. Meanwhile, Juliet was practicing swordsmanship in the training hall with her friends. She moved so skillfully that her opponent surrendered. Juliet thanked her opponent. Scott handed her a towel and remarked that she was good at humbling men. Juliet admitted she was not that skilled yet. She only wanted the strength to change the world. She said that whenever she spoke about it, people would laugh even though she was serious. For that reason, Juliet did not want to be underestimated, but Romeo always seemed to hold back and treat her lightly. She was so annoying that she accidentally tore Scott's towel. Unexpectedly, Romeo saw this from a distance. He could not hear exactly what Juliet was saying, but he was sure she was upset, which made him feel like he had no chance at all. Suddenly, Romeo noticed grade school students from the Black Dogs dorm being caught by high school students from the White Cats dorm. Apparently, the younger students had painted graffiti on a door. Juliet asked them why they did it. One of them explained that the White Cats grade school students had mocked them by calling them weak. A friend of Juliet's pushed the boy for his rude words, causing him to get a nosebleed. Juliet stopped her friend and said that it was true the Black Dogs grade school students were weak. She told them that insulting back was not real revenge because it would not help a friend in trouble. Juliet even dismissed the idea of such retaliation. The boy with the nosebleed grew upset at being underestimated and pushed Juliet. She said that this was what real strength looked like, and it turned out he was capable of doing it. Hearing her words, the boy was moved. Juliet immediately wiped the blood from his nose and told him to go home, warning that she would not go easy on him next time. She even tapped his nose lightly. Juliet's friend wondered why she was acting so soft-hearted. Juliet told them not to let their emotions get stirred up just because of the younger students, since the White Cats had high standards. Romeo realized that it was actually Juliet's nobility that made him like her, and he felt that she should know about his feelings. That meant he needed to gather his courage, and he planned to meet her in secret. Without even realizing it, he ended up walking toward her. Juliet asked what his reason was for being there. Romeo said he did not come to start a fight. He was about to explain his real reason, but found it so hard to say that he blurted out something strange instead, then quickly ran away. At that moment, Juliet admitted she was annoyed because she felt Romeo had once again made a fool of her. Romeo shouted, calling himself a loser. Cantho and Ego saw him and wondered what he had been doing at the gym earlier. Not long after, they saw Juliet come out of the gym. From Mavo's observation, Juliet usually walked back to her dorm alone, and that was the perfect chance for them to defeat the leader of the White Cats. Cantho prepared their masks so their faces would not be recognized. Chizuru was also with them, saying that Romeo's way of dealing with the White Cats was far too slow. Juliet was walking alone toward her dorm when Ego and Cantho followed her from behind, already carrying blunt weapons. When Juliet turned around, they froze up and acted awkwardly. Even though they were wearing masks, she recognized them as Ego and Cantho. Since their cover was blown, they went ahead and attacked. Cantho swung his stick toward her, but she dodged and kicked him back. Ego then came from behind, ready to strike, but Juliet swiftly kicked him down as well. Suddenly, Chizuru sprayed pepper solution into Juliet's eyes. Ego grabbed her, holding her tightly so she could not break free, and Cantho covered her mouth with tape. Juliet had no idea why they were suddenly attacking her. But to Chizuru, this was part of the internation rivalry, and they would do anything for the Black Dogs to win. Chizuru then used a box cutter to slash Juliet's uniform. Just then, Romeo arrived and pulled Juliet away from them. Ego was confused as to why Romeo was rescuing her, while Chizuru said Juliet had stolen their target. Before long, someone was about to pass by, so Chizuru told Ego and Cantho to retreat. Romeo was shocked when he saw Juliet's torn uniform. She opened her eyes, heard his voice, and backed away in fear. He began to wonder if she thought he was the one who attacked her, so he asked her not to misunderstand. Juliet, with tears in her eyes, quickly left. That night, Chizuru, Ego, and Cantho came to Romeo's dorm to ask what he had done earlier. They wanted to talk outside, but without a word, Romeo immediately struck all three of them, furious that they had caused him what felt like a personal disaster. He thought about going to Juliet's dorm to explain the misunderstanding, but figured it would be pointless. Suddenly, an arrow flew past and struck near Chizuru's head. It carried a letter from Juliet asking Romeo to meet her at the fountain in the central plaza right away. Romeo went there and found Juliet already waiting, holding a sword. He was certain she wanted to challenge him. Juliet asked whether he had attacked her earlier or saved her. If he had attacked, she would fight him with the sword she carried. If he had saved her, she wanted to know why, since they were supposed to be enemies. The real reason was love, but Romeo could not bring himself to say it because he was not ready, so he decided to lie like he usually did. Juliet said that if he saved her out of pity, that was just as hurtful, because she did not want to be pitied by anyone. She cried, saying she could not stand being seen as weak by him any longer. Romeo began to realize that maybe she had cried earlier because of that. He tried to deny it, but Juliet pointed out that he always held back his attacks against her and avoided fighting, which to her was the same as underestimating her. Since they were kids, Juliet and Romeo had always been at each other's throats, to the point where their teachers often scolded them. All Romeo knew about Persia was that she was the only daughter of a noble family from the Western Kingdom, but in her homeland, titles and wealth were only passed down to men. If things stayed that way, she would lose everything. Romeo eventually understood why Juliet wanted the power to change the world. She wanted the strength to stand on equal ground with men, the intelligence so other nobles wouldn't look down on her, and the influence so no one could ignore her, all to change the laws of their world. Romeo realized he had been ignoring her feelings. His attempts to protect her had only ended up hurting her. Romeo decided he wouldn't hold back anymore. He told Juliet to fight him, and she thanked him before asking him to show his full strength. She had handed him one of her swords. They both got ready to duel, all because of Romeo's hesitation that had wounded her before. As they drew their swords, Romeo suddenly blurted out that he loved her and asked her to be his girlfriend. Juliet's face instantly turned red. Romeo reassured her that he was being serious, but Juliet got annoyed and attacked, thinking he was just messing with her again. Romeo told her he wasn't joking, and that the reason he'd never fought her seriously was because he loved her. He insisted he had never thought of her as weak, but Juliet just couldn't bring herself to trust him yet and kept attacking. They continued clashing until Romeo finally said everything he had been holding in. He would even change the world if that's what it took to stay by her side. Juliet was taken aback and ended up shoving him into a fountain. Walking over to him, she called him an idiot, saying she didn't understand why he was talking like that. She doubted he could pull it off alone, so she said she'd help him. To Romeo's surprise, Juliet agreed to be his girlfriend, but only if he could prove he could change the world. Romeo could hardly believe what he'd heard and asked her to say it again. Overwhelmed, he started crying tears of joy. Koksha, who happened to be there, was shocked too, since Romeo had always thought Juliet hated him. Juliet admitted she had never said she hated him. When Romeo asked if she loved him, Juliet said she didn't know. She told him to keep their relationship a secret. Romeo agreed without hesitation, saying it didn't matter as long as he could be with her. After that, they started dating in secret. The next morning on the way to school, Romeo caught up to her and asked if they could walk together now that they were a couple, but Juliet quickly told him not to talk to her. Romeo was stunned by her reaction. A moment later, Scott and Hasuki arrived to meet their respective leaders, and that's when Romeo realized Juliet had acted that way because other people were nearby. That day, the students from the Black Doggy dorm and the White Cat dorm crossed paths again, ready to start another brawl. Hasuki complained that the White Cat students were ruining the scenery, and Scott, not wanting to be outdone, fired back with his own remark. Juliet then suggested that they settle things with a match. Hasuki happily accepted the challenge, but she was startled to see Romeo's flustered expression that to her resembled a sheepish goat. Romeo quickly switched to a more intimidating look. Once the fight began, the students charged at each other without hesitation, trading blows without fear. Juliet swung her staff at Romeo, but he easily caught it. The battle grew more intense. Scott took a powerful kick from Hasuki, and Hasuki then offered to help Romeo take on Juliet. Scott, on the other hand, wanted to assist Juliet. But when both sides looked around, they realized Romeo and Juliet were no longer in the fight. It turned out Romeo had pulled Juliet aside to another spot. Juliet was confused about what he was doing. Romeo admitted he simply wanted to know more about her. Juliet immediately gave him information about her blood type, birthday, and eyesight, but that wasn't what Romeo meant. He explained that he wanted to spend time alone with her. Hearing this, Juliet chose to leave. Romeo didn't expect her reaction. He thought that couples were supposed to do romantic things together. He grabbed Juliet's hand and said that even without a reason, and even if there was danger, he still wanted to be with her. He was about to confess his feelings when Hasuki suddenly showed up to help him. Romeo quickly pretended to be restraining Juliet. Romeo refused Hasuki's help, but Juliet, clearly annoyed, kicked him under the chin, sending him sprawling. She left immediately. Hasuki went over to Romeo, surprised that he had been taken down by Juliet. Later that afternoon, while Juliet was in the changing room, her friends praised her for defeating Romeo. After they left, Juliet's thoughts drifted to her past. When she was little, she had wanted to give flowers to her father, but he turned her down, telling her not to bother him with unimportant things because he was busy. Romeo, on the other hand, always wanted to be with her for no reason at all. Suddenly, she heard Romeo's voice calling her name. Looking around, she spotted him at the window and was startled to see him there. She thought to herself that Romeo was acting like a flirt. Romeo said there was something he wanted to tell her. Juliet cracked the window open slightly, and Romeo quickly apologized for earlier. He explained that he had asked some grade school kids what people in the West do when they're dating, and they told him that giving a rosary was a sign of love. Romeo then offered the rosary to Juliet, asking her to accept it as proof of his feelings. Just then, Scott interrupted, asking Romeo what he was doing. Romeo countered by asking why Scott was there, and Scott explained that he was standing guard. Scott was convinced Romeo would try to attack Juliet when she was off guard. Juliet shut the window again, and Scott leaped at Romeo to catch him. The two of them fell, and Juliet saw Romeo holding up the rosary he had planned to give her. When Romeo regained consciousness, he was back at the dorm, resting on Hasuki's lap. Confused, he asked why he was there. Hasuki claimed Juliet had been cruel enough to push him off the roof, and also informed him that the Black Doggy dorm students were now storming the White Cat dorm to avenge him. They weren't just doing it for Romeo, but to protect the pride of their dorm. Hearing this, Romeo tried to run off, but Hasuki stopped him, wanting to take care of him. However, Romeo managed to swap places with Yotari, the dorm's dog, and slip away. He chased after Juliet, but she kept avoiding him, not wanting to stop because the Black Doggy dorm students were chasing her too. Romeo told his friends to stop, saying he would go after Juliet himself. Suddenly, Scott and his friends blocked Romeo's path. Scott couldn't believe Romeo would gang up on Juliet and challenged him to fight again. Romeo was baffled. How had things turned into this when he just wanted to give Juliet a gift? He stayed silent while his dorm mates fought the White Cat students, holding onto the rosary and remembering Juliet's words about proving he could change the world. Lost in thought, Romeo didn't notice Scott and two others ganging up on him. In the struggle, the rosary broke. Romeo's energy seemed to drain away as he walked off, leaving everyone wondering what was wrong. Then, without warning, Romeo lifted a huge statue. He was furious. Not because of the fight, but because the rosary, which had cost him so much, had been broken by them. Romeo attacked everyone with the statue he was holding, swinging it around to take down anyone involved in the fight, whether they were from the Black Dogs or the White Cats. That night, he was punished by being told to pull weeds near the lake. Feeling frustrated as he looked at the broken rosary, he was about to throw it into the lake when Juliet appeared and stopped him. She already knew about his punishment for damaging the statue. Romeo apologized for breaking the gift he had wanted to give her. Juliet then asked him to row a boat for her. Romeo worried someone might see them, but Juliet reassured him it was fine since it was already dark. He found it strange considering Juliet was usually the one reminding him to avoid being seen by others. They got on the boat together and headed toward the middle of the lake. Juliet enjoyed the cool night breeze while Romeo couldn't believe he was alone with her on a boat. Juliet then took the rosary from his pocket, realizing that was what he had wanted to give her. Romeo admitted he could just buy another one in town, so he didn't mind if she threw it away. Instead, Juliet told him to close his eyes. When he opened them again, he was startled to see her face right in front of his. Blushing, he realized she had placed a rosary around his neck. Romeo was surprised and asked if she had fixed it with magic, but Juliet explained that it was her own rosary. He then learned that people from her culture wore rosaries every morning for prayer, and she gave hers only to someone truly special as a good luck charm. This particular rosary had been a gift from her mother when she got accepted into the school. It was precious to her because she prayed with it daily, making it a sincere symbol of her feelings. Juliet asked Romeo to take care of it, but he said such a valuable item should stay with her, and that her feelings were enough for him. Juliet immediately began rowing back to shore. Romeo stood to try and stop her, but ended up falling into the lake. Not understanding why Juliet was upset, he called out for her to help him since he couldn't swim, but she simply left. The next day at school, Romeo was searching for Juliet in the courtyard when Hasuki approached and invited him to go into town with her to visit the Dahlia Garden. Romeo refused, explaining he already had plans with someone else. Curious, Hasuki asked who he was going with. Just then, an adorable-looking boy walked up to Romeo, and Romeo quickly left with him. Only then did Hasuki realize why Romeo had never shown interest in her. She assumed he was into boys. Shocked, she fainted and was immediately taken to the student infirmary by her friends. Romeo hadn't expected Juliet's disguise as a cute boy to fool Hasuki so easily that would seem to have caused an entirely different misunderstanding. The day before, Romeo and Juliet had gone to the confessional to talk. Romeo had asked her out for the next day, since it would be the only day in May when they could leave the dorms. Juliet refused, saying it was impossible. If they had to meet in secret even just to talk, there was no way they could go on a date openly. Romeo then handed her a uniform and a wig for a disguise, both handmade by him. He was confident they could go on a date without being recognized. Juliet called him an idiot, warning that it would be dangerous if they were caught. Romeo looked disappointed, saying that if things kept going this way, they'd never be able to have a date. Seeing him upset, Juliet told him that even if Mia cried, it wouldn't change anything. Dating was impossible for them. Yet the next day, she wore the disguise and went out with him anyway. Suddenly, Scott appeared, calling out Juliet's name. They thought their cover had been blown, but Scott explained he was just searching for her because he could sense her scent near Romeo. He then ran off to look for her, hoping to invite her to tour the city. Romeo felt relieved that her disguise had worked and figured it was finally time to enjoy their date. Not long after, Romeo's friends approached and asked who the student with him was. Romeo claimed it was a relative from middle school named Chulio. His friends remarked that the name sounded strange and that the face seemed oddly familiar. To Romeo's dismay, they started blushing as they stared at Juliet in disguise. Soon, even more female students began approaching, curious about the cute boy with Romeo. As the crowd grew larger, Romeo became increasingly annoyed. They were completely ruining his date plans. They eventually arrived at Dahlia City. Both the city and Dahlia Academy had been established as a symbol of friendship between the Western nation and Tua. To Romeo's surprise, his friends had followed them there. It turned out they wanted to hang out with Juliet as well. Romeo told them they would have to defeat him first if they wanted to spend time with her. Mia was puzzled to see Romeo looking so cheerful, especially since, according to Shizuka, he usually didn't care about those around him, had a stern face, disliked chatting, and often gave off an intimidating aura. At that moment, Romeo was picking out a rosary, while Juliet was surrounded by friends, which meant he couldn't give it to her in front of them. His frustration didn't stop there. When they went to a restaurant he had planned to visit, every seat had already been reserved. That ruined his idea of having a meal together while enjoying the ocean view. Romeo still couldn't figure out why his friends kept following him. In the end, they settled for eating ramen. Everyone tried to convince Juliet to sit with them. That was when Chartreuse from the White Cat's dorm happened to be at the same restaurant, enjoying her meal. She wasn't surprised by the commotion caused by the Black Dog students, but she was briefly startled when she saw Juliet's face. Romeo and the others ate ramen together, though he couldn't help wondering why they ended up in such a dull place. Juliet struggled to use chopsticks and accidentally spilled ramen on her clothes. Romeo quickly tugged at the hem of her pants so the hot broth wouldn't burn her skin, but Juliet yelped and hit him in embarrassment. Afterward, they went to an amusement park. Romeo hadn't expected his lunch and shopping plans with Juliet to fall apart like that, so he grabbed her hand and led her to the haunted house. Inside, he felt relieved to finally be alone with her in the dark. Suddenly, a zombie appeared. Romeo scolded it while Juliet immediately struck it before running out, refusing to go back inside. Romeo rushed to look for her, worried she might think of this as the worst date ever. Meanwhile, Chizuru was shopping with Kaksho and Eigo when he spotted Romeo looking downcast. Wanting to get back at him, Chizuru kicked Romeo into the sea and stepped on his head. Suddenly, Juliet arrived and scolded Chizuru, saying that even if Romeo could be foolish at times, he still meant a lot to her. Chizuru then tried to trick Juliet into being friends, but she threw him aside without hesitation. Later, Romeo and Juliet went up to the tower to talk. Romeo had thought Juliet had gone home, but she explained she had only gone to the restroom because the wig she was wearing was making her head itch. He suspected she might be upset because their date didn't go smoothly, but she smiled and told him she had heard about how different he seemed compared to his usual gloomy self when they were together. She can wonder how someone from Tua could handle such spicy ramen. To Juliet, a date wasn't just about eating and shopping. It was about getting to know each other. Because of that, she considered their date a success. Romeo was touched by her words. Unfortunately, Scott appeared and the two started fighting again. Romeo couldn't believe how their alone time always ended that way. Unexpectedly, when Romeo and Juliet returned to the dorm, Chartreux happened to see them together. When Romeo and Juliet were spending time together, Romeo asked her to keep her schedule free for the next 3 days since that day marked 1 month since they started dating. Juliet was surprised that Romeo had actually been counting, especially since their relationship could end at any moment. For Romeo, every day in their relationship felt like a life or death gamble, and the fact that they had made it a whole month without anyone finding out made him want to celebrate together. Juliet laughed, not expecting Romeo to be the type to get carried away with emotions. When Juliet didn't immediately agree, Romeo sulked. Not wanting to see him like that, Juliet finally gave in. Just then, Scott and Hasuki walked up to them. In a panic, Romeo and Juliet started pretending to fight so their relationship wouldn't be discovered. It turned out Scott and Hasuki came to tell them that Chartreux had returned to school after taking a year off. At that moment, Chartreux asked for a driver to stop the car and told him to inform the students to welcome her. The students quickly got ready. When Chartreux arrived, the entire White Cats dorm cheered excitedly. Chartreux went over to Scott, asking him to entertain her, but then suddenly hit him in the face, saying his presence was boring her. Juliet greeted Chartreux, and Chartreux walked over to her, touching her hair. She seemed curious why none of the Black Dog's dorm students came to greet her even though she had told all students to welcome her. Romeo bluntly said he refused to do so because the Black Dogs weren't her servants. Chartreux claimed she could make him obey her. Hearing that, Romeo stepped forward, ready to confront her, but stopped when Chartreux quietly said she knew he was dating Juliet. Everyone was shocked to see Romeo freeze like that. Chartreux added that she knew about their disguise, but Romeo pretended not to understand what she was talking about. Then Chartreux showed him a photo she had taken of him and Juliet on a date. Romeo slumped to the ground, admitting defeat. Hasuki couldn't believe what she was seeing and even praised Chartreux's cunning. Romeo was stunned that their relationship had been discovered so quickly, and he knew that if things continued like this, they could be forced to break up. Chartreux approached him, saying she would keep the secret if he agreed to her condition, becoming her loyal pet. At first, Romeo refused, but when Chartreux casually mentioned that her shoulders were sore, Romeo found himself giving her a massage. He realized he had no other choice but to protect their secret. Juliet, however, looked at him with disgust. Hasuki walked up and slapped him repeatedly, trying to snap him out of it. His friends were also confused as to why he was letting himself be pushed around like this. Later, Chartreux blew a whistle to summon Romeo, warning that he had better show up by the third whistle or she would expose the dating photo. Romeo knelt down, begging her not to do that, but she didn't care. She only wanted him to be her obedient pet. She even reminded him that if the truth got out, he would lose his supporters and his popularity. Romeo knew that if that happened, Juliet would never be able to achieve her dream, leaving him with no other option. Not long after, Romeo sat alone, deep in thought, when Juliet appeared and asked why he had been alone with Chartreux earlier. She said she didn't really care who he spent time with, but his expression when looking at Chartreux seemed off. She half-jokingly asked if he preferred girls with a more noticeable figure. Romeo denied it, saying she misunderstood, when suddenly the whistle blew again. He quickly said he had to go, leaving Juliet confused about what he was really doing. This time, Chartreux ordered him to crawl and escort her to the dorm. The Black Dog's students were baffled by what they saw. Romeo suggested it would be faster if he carried her, but Chartreux insisted on treating him like her pet. even dangling a dog bone in front of him to motivate him. Romeo refused until she replaced the bone with the photo of him and Juliet on their date. At that, he sped up instantly. The Black Dog's dorm students watched in shock, and Chizuru even suspected Romeo had betrayed them, saying he deserved the harshest punishment. After dropping Charduk off, Romeo crawled back toward Juliet, leaving her stunned. He apologized for making her wait, saying there was a reason for what he was doing. But before he could explain, the whistle sounded again. Charduk asked Romeo to catch a deer for her because she was craving it. Like it or not, Romeo went along with her request, while Juliet kept waiting for him until nightfall. When Romeo finally returned to Juliet, he was covered in blood and carrying the deer. Juliet was completely shocked, but Romeo tried to calm her down. He was frustrated because Charduk seemed to be enjoying herself a little too much. Juliet then asked what the whistle sound had to do with him. Romeo couldn't give her an explanation, but he promised he would never fail to protect her. Juliet believed that Romeo would never lose and told him not to wear a face that wasn't truly his. Not long after, the whistle sounded again, and instead of stopping him, Juliet urged him to go quickly, adding that she was looking forward to celebrating their 1-month anniversary. When Romeo met Charduk, he found out she only wanted to see her pet's face. The students in the White Cat's dorm thought the Black Dogs had probably been defeated. Hearing this, Romeo didn't care. What mattered was for him to keep obeying until he could find Charduk's weakness, and he had to figure it out within 3 days before his anniversary with Juliet. Romeo was determined to pay her back for what she had done. However, when he returned to his own dorm, he discovered that his friends had thrown his belongings outside. They'd refused to let a White Cat servant into the Black Dog's dorm. Koka stated that Romeo should have faced severe punishment, but they forgave him because of Hasuki. Hasuki defended Romeo with all her might, convinced he had not betrayed Tuwa, and guessed that maybe Charduk had found some weakness of his. They warned that if Romeo was ever caught betraying them, he would never forgive him. Romeo was truly grateful to Hasuki for standing up for him. 2 days before the anniversary, Charduk continued to treat Romeo like her servant, ordering him to put on her shoes, feed her, and even deal with troublemakers for her. Romeo was extremely annoyed but forced himself to stay calm so he could keep searching for her weakness. Unfortunately, during his observations, he realized Charduk was highly intelligent, physically strong, skilled at charming people, and seemed to have no weaknesses at all. Romeo came to understand that being a princess wasn't just about appearances. He was baffled. Plenty of people were eager to fulfill Charduk's wishes, so why was he the one stuck being her victim? While Romeo was crawling on the ground escorting Charduk to dinner, she suddenly told him to turn around. Romeo didn't understand why, but it turned out Juliet was walking ahead of them. That night, Charduk shared a room with Juliet again, but this time she seemed distant toward her. The day before the celebration, Romeo asked Juliet about Charduk. Juliet was surprised by the question, and Romeo admitted he was just curious. Juliet explained that she and Charduk had been childhood friends who used to spend a lot of time together, but ever since returning, Charduk had been acting cold toward her. Suddenly, Charduk's whistle blew again. Romeo noticed it always happened whenever he was talking to Juliet. Juliet tried to hold him back, but Romeo was sure she must be angry at him. If things kept going this way, their relationship might end, and he couldn't let that happen. He had to settle the matter before their anniversary. The next day, the day of the celebration, early in the morning, the school's information center called Charduk to the principal's office. In reality, it was just a ruse Romeo had set up so he could search her room. He was looking for anything he could use against her, but before he could find anything, Charduk returned. She suspected someone had tricked her to get into her room. Believing the intruder was still hiding somewhere inside, she declared she would have that person expelled from school. Charduk checked under the desk but didn't find anyone. Then she looked under the bed, but there was nothing there either. She opened her wardrobe yet still found no one. At that moment, Charduk started to panic. It turned out that Romeo had discovered something unusual in her room, a hidden space behind her mirror. What was even more surprising was that the entire secret room was filled with photos of Juliet. Romeo suspected that Charduk must have feelings for Juliet. Charduk denied it, and when Romeo tried to take the photos, she stopped him, saying they were her collection. Romeo began teasing her, imagining what Juliet and the other students from the White Cat's dorm would think if they found out that the princess of their kingdom had secretly gathered photos of Juliet. Charduk immediately tried to attack him. Romeo suspected that Charduk wanted to break him and Juliet apart because she was jealous. Frustrated, Charduk pushed him away and admitted that Juliet had always been by her side, always listened to her, and was her most precious and important friend. Charduk was upset that Juliet had chosen to be with Romeo instead, something she couldn't forgive. She pleaded with Romeo not to take Juliet away from her because Juliet meant so much to her. Romeo then realized that Charduk truly liked Juliet. Soon after, they heard Juliet's voice from outside the door, and Romeo discovered that Juliet was actually Chartruk's roommate. Panic set in for Chartruk. Her photos of Juliet were scattered everywhere, and she didn't want Juliet to find out about her feelings. Romeo advised her not to give up and suggested buying some time. When Juliet opened the door, she suspected someone else was in the room, but Chartruk blocked her way. Juliet tried to enter, yet Chartruk kept stopping her and tried to start a conversation at the door. Growing suspicious, Juliet insisted on coming inside, explaining she had an urgent matter. When Juliet finally stepped into the room, all the scattered photos had already been cleared away. She went to fix her hair in front of the mirror. Chartruk assumed Juliet must have an important plan given how tense her face looked. Juliet was confused about why she was being asked that, and Chartruk admitted she felt like Juliet might not come back. Juliet didn't understand her meaning, assuring her that no matter what happened, she would always stay by her side because Chartruk was her friend. Juliet apologized for calling her Char, but Chartruk told her that only Juliet was allowed to call her that. She held Juliet's hand tightly, and for a moment, they both felt like things were just like the old days. Juliet then left, saying she had promised to meet someone else. After Juliet was gone, Chartruk opened the mirror again and found Romeo looking at the photos. She checked to make sure he hadn't stolen any. Chartruk asked why he had helped her when she had treated him so poorly. Romeo explained that if the truth came out, he wouldn't be able to use it against her anymore, and besides, he understood what it was like to be unable to confess feelings to someone you liked. Chartruk told him that as long as he was dating Juliet, Juliet would be in danger, and that was why she couldn't give her blessing. Romeo called her a girl who wasn't cute, to which Chartruk agreed, saying she was the tired princess from the West. That night, Romeo met Juliet by the lake and apologized for being late. He was surprised that she wasn't angry, and she explained something good had happened. Romeo told her not to worry about him asking about Chartruk. Juliet had already thought about it and said she could understand if he was curious about questionable things. Romeo quickly denied it, calling it a misunderstanding. He was shocked to see the rosary he had given her was whole again and that she was wearing it. Juliet explained that she had repaired it because she could never throw it away. Romeo was moved to tears, and Juliet worried that someone might see him like that. From a distance, Chartruk had been watching them. She decided to let Romeo be for the night because she owed him a favor for what he had done earlier, but only for that night. Since he was a kid, none of Romeo's classmates wanted to team up with him because they thought he was scary. They didn't even want to get involved with him at all. Romeo even started to believe he didn't need friends in the first place. But unlike everyone else, Hasuki never disliked him. Dahlia High School was about to hold the midterm exams, and Hasuki was getting ready for school, feeling genuinely excited about them. That day, Romeo encouraged his friends to give their best in the exams, telling them to aim for the highest scores and beat the White Cats. Everyone became fired up and determined to face the White Cats head-on. Juliet once again disguised herself as Chulio because Romeo had invited her to come meet him. Chulio found it odd that Romeo wanted her to watch the Black Doggy dorm students study. Romeo explained that it was part of the Black Doggy study camp tradition. 3 days before the exams, they would spend 72 intense hours studying until they collapsed, and no one was allowed to leave the dorm during that period. He invited Chulio because he wouldn't be able to see her during those 3 days. Chulio scolded him, saying he should be able to restrain himself. Meanwhile, Eigo and Kantho asked Chizuru to join the study session, but Chizuru refused because he didn't want to get close to anyone. When Chartruk saw Chulio, she suddenly decided to participate, but Romeo commented that Chizuru's foolishness might spread like a disease. Chizuru shot back, calling Romeo the kind of student who nearly failed every year. The two were about to start a fight when Hasuki suddenly arrived and scolded them. Hasuki appeared so strict, calling them brainless pigs who loved to cause trouble. To Julio's surprise, all the Black Doggy dorm students showed deep respect for Hasuki. They immediately straightened up and followed her orders without complaint. Julio couldn't believe how different Hasuki was compared to her usual self. Hasuki even threw books at Chulio and Romeo for talking during the session. Hasuki wondered why Julio, who she thought was a middle school student, was even in the study camp. Romeo explained that Chulio's academic level was on par with a high school student. Hasuki allowed her to stay because she didn't want the camp to kick out anyone. Chulio was still puzzled about Hasuki's sudden change in personality. It turned out that whenever Hasuki wore her glasses, she took on a more serious role. Despite her strictness, she was one of the smartest people in the Black Doggy dorm and took full responsibility for making sure no one failed during study camp. Hasuki then gave the students a test to measure their knowledge. Romeo tried to show off to Julio with question number 1, but ended up falling asleep. As punishment, Hasuki pinched his eyelids to wake him up. Chizuru treated the test like a challenge to see how well he could cheat. using his phone to look up answers. Giulio immediately called him out, saying that a guy looks cooler when he faces challenges honestly. Hearing that, Kantho encouraged Chizuru to teach Giulio a lesson, but instead Chizuru broke his own phone. Kantho was baffled that Chizuru would actually listen to Giulio. He tried to tell Eigo about it, only to find Eigo doing something even stranger. He was sketching a woman's chest shape into his graph. Hazuki came over, asking them to focus on the test. After the test, she explained how to solve the problems correctly. Giulio found it strange that Romeo didn't seem to enjoy studying, and he never complained. Romeo explained that if he failed at such a prestigious school, he would be sent back to his hometown. He also said Hazuki worked hard to make sure no one failed and truly cared for every Black Doggy dorm member, so everyone felt grateful to her. That night, Romeo escorted Juliet back to her dorm. She was planning to return by passing through the underground waterway. Juliet said she had enjoyed the study camp that day since the White Cats never held activities like that. She mentioned that they wouldn't be able to see each other until the exams ended, but she didn't mean she felt lonely. After Juliet entered the waterway, Hazuki suddenly appeared, surprising Romeo. She explained that he had suddenly disappeared, so she came to find him. Romeo assured her he hadn't gone far as he was still within the dorm grounds. He thanked Hazuki for helping him understand the lessons and said he was confident he would pass because of her. Hazuki felt relieved to hear that and was happy to see Romeo smiling again, as he had been acting strange around Chartreuse earlier. She suspected he might have been hiding something from her, but Romeo didn't deny it since Hazuki was his friend. Hazuki reminded him that they were allies and that she wouldn't mind if he asked her for anything. After Hazuki left, Chartreuse suddenly appeared and pinched Romeo's cheek, catching him off guard. Chartreuse was furious when she found out Romeo had smuggled Juliet into the Black Dog dorm by disguising her as a boy. She kicked him and called him indecent. She even threatened him, warning that if he ever pulled something like that again, there would be consequences. Romeo quickly apologized, surprised that Chartreuse had still been keeping an eye on him. Chartreuse accused him of being greedy for getting close to another girl and warned him to make sure Hazuki never found out about his relationship with Juliet, because if she did, the truth could spread to everyone. Romeo disagreed, saying Hazuki wasn't that kind of person. He trusted her deeply because they had known each other since grade school. But to Chartreuse, the fact that he had kept the relationship a secret for so long actually proved he didn't fully trust Hazuki. Romeo denied that, saying that everyone has their own secrets. Without another word, Chartreuse slipped away into the drainage tunnel. In truth, Romeo did want to be honest with Hazuki, but he was afraid that if he told her, their friendship might be ruined. That night, Chizuru noticed Hazuki smiling to herself and found it odd. Hazuki in turn suspected Chizuru had just stolen food from the cafeteria. Chizuru handed her an apple and guessed that Hazuki's dedication to the Black Dogs was actually for Romeo's sake. Hazuki's face turned bright red. Chizuru couldn't help but wonder what she really saw in him. Hazuki explained that when she was younger, she had trouble socializing with other kids and spent most of her time studying. Back in grade school, Romeo once complained about his bad grades, so she pointed out his mistakes on a test. Romeo called her a genius and kept asking her to tutor him. Eventually, he got much better grades. He thanked her and asked if they could be friends. From that moment on, Hazuki began to change. She was happy to be useful to Romeo and wanted to stay by his side. Chizuru realized that this was the reason Hazuki had started her training camp. After that, Chizuru went back to her room. Romeo, who had overheard the entire conversation, stepped inside. Hazuki was shocked and embarrassed that he had heard everything. He asked why she was going so far for him, and she admitted it was because she liked him. Romeo was taken aback. He realized that Hazuki was his very first friend, and knowing her feelings made it even harder to keep hiding his relationship with Juliet. Hazuki felt relieved to finally say it. Gathering his courage, Romeo told her that he was dating Juliet. While he appreciated her feelings, he couldn't return them. Hazuki hadn't expected that answer. She even wondered if Juliet was just using him like Chartreuse had implied, but Romeo insisted it was his own choice. Suddenly, Hazuki shouted as if she was about to announce it to everyone. Romeo panicked and quickly covered her mouth. She struggled to break free, saying she was just shocked by what she had heard. Romeo was surprised. He had believed she would understand if he explained it to her. Hazuki then hugged him and draped a white kimono over his shoulders. Romeo swore he never intended to betray the Black Dogs. Hazuki reminded him of their dorm's rule. If someone fell in love or got into a relationship with a white cat, they had to take responsibility in the most extreme way. She reached for the Tuwa sword, saying that even though she was sad, a rule was still a rule and she was willing to follow it herself. Romeo, startled, asked if the sword was just a replica, wondering why so many girls in the school loved carrying swords. He still believed Hazuki wouldn't really hurt him. But Hazuki being Hazuki, wouldn't let him deceive the Black Dogs. She declared she would deal with him herself if she had to. Romeo bolted. He had completely misjudged the situation. He never expected Hasuki would end up hating him. She chased after him, shouting his name. The commotion woke Kantho and Eigo, who were confused about why Romeo looked so terrified. Moments later, Hasuki caught up, brandishing her sword. In the chaos, the swing of her blade shredded Kantho and Eigo's clothes. Romeo smashed through a window to escape, but Hasuki kept up the pursuit. Not long after, Chizuru woke up from the noise. She was stunned to see Kantho and Eigo standing there without their clothes. She quickly rushed back into her room and locked the door. Meanwhile, the ruckus reached Juliet, who looked out her window. It didn't take long for her to spot Romeo sprinting across the courtyard, desperately trying to get away from Hasuki. Juliet was startled and quickly closed the curtains, unable to understand what Romeo had been doing just moments earlier. Meanwhile, Hasuki was still searching for Romeo in the garden behind the dorm. At that time, Romeo could only hide by hanging onto a tree branch. Before long, Juliet approached him and asked what was going on. Juliet was shocked when she learned that Romeo had told Hasuki about their relationship. Romeo apologized for not informing her first, explaining that he had only wanted to be honest with Hasuki. However, he had overestimated how understanding Hasuki would be. Still, Romeo promised he would find a way to resolve the situation. Before they could talk further, Hasuki pointed her sword at Romeo and asked if it was true that he and Juliet were dating. Romeo asked her to listen to his explanation, but Hasuki, overcome with emotion, swung her sword. Romeo dodged and jumped toward Juliet. Seeing them close together only made Hasuki angrier, and she attacked Juliet. Fortunately, Chartuv appeared in time to block her. Romeo quickly restrained Hasuki while Juliet asked why Chizuru was there. Chartuv apologized and admitted that she had known about Romeo and Juliet's relationship all along. Hasuki was surprised that Chartuv had kept it from her, but Chartuv explained that she had simply been keeping an eye on Juliet against various threats. Then she admitted she had actually come there to kill Romeo. Realizing that both he and Juliet were in danger, Romeo carried her and ran into the garden. Juliet couldn't believe Chartuv had known their secret. When they reached the riverside, Romeo stopped, feeling useless. He spoke about how he had always claimed he wanted to change the world, that he couldn't even convince one friend, and worse, he had put Juliet in danger. Juliet admitted she felt the same, but encouraged him to face them together instead of running away. She told him not to speak so poorly of himself because she believed he could change anything. After all, he had changed her heart. Hasuki and Chartuv caught up with them. Hasuki asked if Romeo was ready to accept his fate, and he agreed. She declared that he had broken the Black Dog Pact and had to be punished. Hasuki charged forward, swinging her sword at him. At that moment, Romeo told her it didn't matter how much she hated him, he still considered her a good friend. Hearing that, Hasuki's mind flashed back to their first friendship as children, and tears welled in her eyes. The sword struck Romeo's head but only left a minor injury. Romeo had suspected all along that the sword was just a replica. Hasuki broke down in tears. Suddenly, Juliet slipped and fell into the river. Romeo immediately jumped in after her, but both Chartuv and Hasuki also dove in to help. When Romeo managed to grab Juliet, he realized with a jolt that he couldn't swim. They began to sink. Hasuki pulled Romeo to safety, while Juliet was rescued by Chartuv. Juliet felt guilty, realizing how much trouble she had caused that day. Hasuki scolded Romeo for jumping in when he couldn't swim. Romeo explained that he had done it because Juliet was in danger. That was when Hasuki understood. Romeo saw Juliet the same way she saw Romeo. She cried, calling him foolish for being the leader of the Black Dogs, yet letting himself be swayed by Juliet. She hurled insults at him, claiming she hated him. The next day, Romeo's friends treated him like usual, which meant Hasuki hadn't told anyone about what happened. Even so, Romeo was still unsure how to face her. Not long after, Hasuki reminded him that the training camp was still ongoing. She was puzzled by the silly look on his face, especially since he was the one who had asked her to remain friends. Romeo smiled at her, but Hasuki warned that she would not overlook what happened the previous night, and if she ever caught him being affectionate with Juliet in front of her, she would have no hesitation in cutting off his head.